Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us to launch the World Pancreatic Cancer Day campaign here in Australia. My name is Jessica Abelson, and together with my family, we founded Purple Our World. Recognizing that the majority of people use social media to access their news and information, Purple Our World leverages the power of social media to raise awareness for pancreatic cancer. In 2014, our wife, mother, and sister, Rochelle Goldburn, passed away from pancreatic cancer. We were fortunate to have 16 months from diagnosis to passing, which in pancreatic cancer terms is actually quite a long time. Unfortunately, we have spoken to people who have had mere weeks with their loved ones. Following Mum's passing, we decided to be her voice, to speak up for those we've lost, and to ensure families never have to experience what we went through. Together with Cancer Australia and our charity partners, the Gastrointestinal Cancer Institute, the Garvan Institute of Medical Research, PanCare Foundation, and PanKind, the Australian Pancreatic Cancer Foundation, Purple Our World is a founding member of the Australian Pancreatic Cancer Alliance. Purple Our World is also an inaugural member of the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition, which brings together 95 advocacy organisations from 35 countries around the world to drive transformational change for those affected by pancreatic cancer. In Australia, the coalition is represented by 3 other organisations: PanCare Foundation, PanKind, and Pancreatic Cancer Matters. We're proud to work collaboratively alongside them as we give Australia a global voice. Why is working collaboratively to raise awareness so important? In Australia today, 10 people will be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. 1 may survive. Pancreatic cancer has the lowest survival rate of all major cancers. In fact, the survival rate in Australia has only just reached double digits, sitting at 10.7%. Compare this to other common cancers like breast, prostate, and skin cancer, which all have survival rates well into the 90s. For the majority of cases, it comes down to a couple of things: a lack of screening, a lack of knowledge of the symptoms and risks, a lack of early detection. An initiative of the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition is World Pancreatic Cancer Day, which this year is tomorrow. I'm currently the chair of the World Pancreatic Cancer Day Committee, and I'm incredibly proud to be sharing this year's campaign with you, focusing on the need to know the symptoms. This year, it's about time. I'm delighted to now introduce Julie Fleshman, chair of the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition and president and CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, an extremely influential advocacy organization based in Los Angeles.
My name is Julie Fleshman. I'm president and CEO of the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network in the United States and also chair of the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition. The World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition is comprised of 95 member organizations from 35 countries across the globe, all focused on fighting pancreatic cancer. The coalition's mission is to raise global awareness and visibility for pancreatic cancer and to work collaboratively to accelerate progress. I'm so thrilled that there are 4 organizations from Australia that are part of the coalition, including Purple Our World. It's been such a pleasure to work with Purple Our World and their leadership, Jess and Danny. Purple Our World's mission to raise awareness about pancreatic cancer is critically important, and I greatly appreciate their spirit of collaboration and partnership. Please join the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition on November 19th for World Pancreatic Cancer Day as we paint the world purple and raise global awareness about this challenging disease. We can't do it without you. Thank you so much for your support.
Thanks, Julie. We look forward to continuing to work with you on the global campaign of raising awareness. We believe that knowledge is power. We'll freely admit that when Mum was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, we walked into the gastroenterologist's office as a family and asked where the pancreas was in the body and what it does. Since Mum's diagnosis, though, we have made it our mission to understand this misunderstood but very important organ situated deep behind the abdomen. We believe that it's about time to know the symptoms of pancreatic cancer, which include persistent stomach pain, mid-back pain, unexplained weight loss, jaundice, nausea, changes in stool, loss of appetite, and new onset diabetes. There's also a need to know the risk factors, listen to your body, Talk to your primary healthcare professional because knowing these symptoms can lead to early detection. Well-known media personality and Walkley Award-winning journalist Tracy Spicer, AM, lost her mum to pancreatic cancer in 1999, aged just 52. Tracy is an ambassador of Purple Our World and patron of the Australian Pancreatic Cancer Alliance. Tonight, Tracy is in conversation with a distinguished panel of oncologists and researchers who are on the cutting edge of developing and researching better treatments for pancreatic cancer patients. The panel consists of Professor David Goldstein, Senior Staff Specialist in the Department of Medical Oncology at the Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick. David was Mum's oncologist, and the family is deeply indebted to him for his care and for making Mum's life after diagnosis as comfortable as possible. Dr. Lorraine Chantrell, Senior Staff Specialist in Oncology at Wollongong Hospital. Lorraine is also Chair of the Australian Gastrointestinal Trials Group and was recently appointed by Cancer Australia to chair the National Pancreatic Cancer Roadmap Steering Group. Associate Professor Phoebe Phillips from the University of New South Wales Lowy Cancer Research Centre. Phoebe heads the university's Pancreatic Cancer Translational Research Group and has for many years been at the cutting edge of research in pancreatic cancer. We hope you find the panel informative.
It is indeed a great honour to be in conversation with such a brilliant and outstanding panel. Dr. Chantrell, let's start with you because you were recently appointed by Cancer Australia as Chair of the National Pancreatic Cancer Roadmap Steering Group. Where are we at with this right now?
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks for your continued interest in pancreas cancer. So yeah, Cancer Australia, I would have to congratulate them. They have taken on board a directive by the Health Minister to create a roadmap, as it's called, for pancreas cancer in Australia over the next few years. So it's really trying to connect with experts in pancreas cancer, but also consumers and carers of people with pancreas cancer, and all stakeholders involved in pancreas cancer in Australia to work out what they think are the most important issues facing people with pancreas cancer so that we can try and reduce the terrible statistics that we're facing with this disease. I think so far what we've done is we've formed a very good team of people who have communicated in a very open and useful fashion to try to get together and think together about how we can do things best. So that's what I've been most impressed with so far, and I'm confident that we will have a unified approach to the way in which we can tackle this disease.
A unified approach is so important. Let's drill into some of the thorny areas, one of them being the fact that there is no early detection test for pancreatic cancer. Often when people find out, it's simply too late. There was some talk about a saliva test, but Professor Goldstein, is this a possibility or are there other innovations we should be keeping a closer eye on?
So I think the saliva test received a lot of attention a few years ago, but it's not really progressed very far. There are really a number of avenues. It's still true that this is a very hard to detect cancer. It's deep in the body. By the time you have symptoms, it's often very widely spread and very advanced. And because it's an uncommon cancer, the usual screening tests that work so well in breast and bowel, the number of people needed to test to find one person with pancreas cancer is enormous. So the cost per life year saved is simply unmanageable. What we need to have is either a simple, inexpensive test that doesn't exist yet, but one of the directions that's looking very interesting is the ability to look for rogue tumour cells in the blood, and in particular for DNA. And that's going to become affordable. And there will be a time where you'll be able to test from the blood relatively cheaply for DNA, which will tell you there's something going on. Now you should do the test that otherwise doesn't make sense because 200 people will be fine and only one will have something. This way, with a discriminator, a blood test, maybe 50% of those you look at will have something. So I think that's the most promising direction, but it's not available next week. There are some years of work ahead, mainly to get it affordable. We can do these things, but they're just extremely expensive and hard to do. That's all changing. Almost on an annual basis, the price is dropping to half of what it was. So I'm confident in 5 years, say, that we will really have more affordable tests that will be reliable and will tell us what we need to know. Can I add, before I move on, one very important thing? Increasingly, we've recognised that mature onset diabetes, so with the obesity epidemic, diabetes is a major health problem in all Western and even other societies, less well-developed societies, right, economically. But the development of diabetes in midlife with weight loss rather than weight gain is a real warning signal. So that allows us to identify not everybody with pancreas cancer, but at least a meaningful minority of people with pancreas cancer that we can then pick up, and that may well be early rather than late. Hence the importance for GPs and patients to say, diabetes, but I'm losing weight, feeling a bit tired, maybe there's something else we should think about.
Gee, that's interesting. Research is certainly going in the right direction, and we know that recent advances in chemotherapy and radiation treatments as well will hopefully lead to longer lifespans. But Associate Professor Phillips, has the average length of survival from diagnosis to death increased in recent years? Are we going in the right direction there too?
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for increasing awareness about pancreatic cancer during a month where we're really trying to do that. So thank you. Yes, when I started 22 years ago in the field, sadly, survival for 5 years beyond diagnosis was less than 4%. And now we've more than doubled that. So at the moment, 10% of patients live out to 5 years or beyond, which is only small steps, but still, I think what it shows is we've made big improvements already. I think in the last 5 years, I've really watched the clinical space and the research space, and there's engagement across all of the parts now that we didn't have when I started out. So I'm involved in the clinical teams, and the clinical teams are really intently involved in what I do. And we finally understand more about this disease. And so I think the opportunities in the next 5 to 10 years are very exciting from a research and translating that research into the clinic.
This is a question for anybody. What is the current status of clinical trials here in Australia and overseas? Because what you've just said there, Phoebe, is incredibly encouraging.
Yeah, so I think Phoebe did give us some encouragement, but also illustrated that there's a long way to go for people with pancreas cancer. And the clinical trials, I think, are part of the secret to making things even better. We've had a number of clinical trials available recently and becoming available to our patients with pancreas cancer. One of the ones that I'll let David talk about uses a new type of radiotherapy. So David, who's running that study, he should talk about that, and I'll talk about some other ones in a moment.
So just to add a broader point, that actually activity in clinical trials has been really going on at a reasonably impressive pace for about a decade, but many of them have turned out to be negative. In other words, we've tried something that sounded interesting, but when really tested properly, it has not been. So it's more about how many positives have we gotten out of it rather than are we doing enough. Probably are doing enough. So the one that Lorraine was kind enough to highlight is called Master Plan. It's led by the radiation oncology community. Andrew Orr in particular is the chief, and Andrew Kneebone and Andrew Orr are the two chief investigators. And it asks the question whether very carefully targeted radiation at very high dose to a small area can have a bigger impact than, unfortunately, the previous trials that said radiation wasn't doing enough as much as we'd like. And it's quite innovative and Australian-led and supported through the MRFF program. So we're pretty proud of the fact the Australian Gastrointestinal Trials Group is facilitating running that study. And the other really interesting thing is that one of the challenges of pancreas cancer in trials is there's a heap of genetic changes, what we call a very long tail. And Lorraine, in fact, was involved in many of the research projects that led to understanding that. And so that means that every particular problem is only 2% or 4% of the whole group. How are you going to study that? Well, the only way to study this, A, to have an international effort, you can't do that in one country, and B, to amalgamate those with other groups of patients who have the same genetic change. So you've got enough people, a so-called basket trial, and you can do 7 in a row. There's a famous group in the UK called the Stampede Group, and they just keep adding another basket, but they have the generic trial running all the time with new ideas. So innovative ways of doing trials is coming along to help us get more efficient and get an answer sooner.
It sounds like a numbers game, and the numbers are going the right way when it comes to research and improvement in the future. But how much has the COVID-19 pandemic affected research in this area? Are a lot of funds being diverted to deal with the pandemic and taken away from things like cancer, particularly cancers that traditionally haven't got very much attention, like pancreatic cancer?
So I might let Lorraine, and then I'll jump in after.
So it's an interesting question, Tracy, and I'm proud to say that for the most part, our trials have continued throughout the pandemic without stopping for the most part. Some trials, of course, have suffered in slower recruitment rates as a result of having a sort of fewer patients coming through the cancer centres. But on the whole, we have tried to continue because we have argued very strongly that our trial treatments are part of standard treatment for people with cancer and they should not be stopped just because of the virus. So they have continued. As regards to funding, I don't think we have seen the impact of that shift in funding yet, Tracy. As you know, our funding, often we have to apply for it in advance and all of that kind of thing. So I don't think we have yet seen that impact. Presumably we will see that impacted in the next budgets, the federal and state governments coming up. But with regards to funding for pancreas cancer more generally, I think pancreas cancer has suffered in the past from poor funding, mainly because the people who can campaign for funding are sadly deceased. So in other cancers where the survival rate is much higher or people survive for a lot longer before they die, they have the opportunity to campaign fiercely for their cancer. Unfortunately, our pancreas cancer patients are denied that opportunity. So for those reasons and other reasons of just lack of awareness, I think, we've suffered from, generally speaking, a lack of funding in comparison to other areas of medical research.
So if I can just add 2 things about that, then I can see that Professor Phillips also wants to add. The one thing that probably COVID-19, and there's data already about that, is people have tended not to do screening for several reasons. One, scared to come in, and B, screening like, for instance, endoscopies and colonoscopies and mammograms stopped for a significant period of time. And regrettably, there's already evidence of late presentations of more advanced diseases because of that. So there has been some price to pay for lockdowns and other very effective. Look at the Victorian data. We know it's effective, but it comes at a cost, and that cost is some problems with screening and identification of early cancers. So that's one thing, and I would really agree. The funding, we won't really know about that till next year, and it could be bad.
I can just add, Tracy, look, it's great that the clinical trials haven't been blocked, but I can certainly say we've already felt a big impact across Australia at the research level. And that's as a consequence that most research in Australia is supported by universities. And the problem is universities haven't been eligible for JobKeeper and research grants have been delayed. And so, for example, myself and many teams across the country are having to let go of staff because we can't renew their contracts because we don't have grants, and the grants were delayed in terms of outcomes, and the universities can't foot the bill, unfortunately, because they've been relying on international students to support research. And so I would say that sadly, we are already feeling detrimental impact in researchers. And so I hope that we can get through this next year. Thanks.
Can I just add one thing about that? We are potentially at risk of losing a whole generation of emerging scientists. The next group that are going to be the major early and mid-career researchers of the next decade, they can't get employment now. We are going to destroy the intellectual resources of this country dramatically. It's an emerging problem that hasn't been talked about enough.
Yeah.
Based upon that, we're expected to see an increase in the incidence of pancreatic cancer, particularly around developed countries. Even though we're seeing wonderful scientific advances to deal with that and combat it, what should we all be doing now? And I will go to you first, Lorraine, on this as chair of the steering group. What call to action would you like to give to anybody who's watching
So
tonight?
I think the main thing is to encourage people to see their doctor if they have any symptoms that they are concerned about. And in particular, as Professor Goldstein mentioned, the development of diabetes in later life in someone who doesn't have some of the usual risk factors, but also the lack of control of diabetes in someone who's known to have diabetes for some time. So just be vigilant in looking after yourself and do present to the doctor, and don't be afraid to ask questions of your medical practitioner, and to even suggest, would it be okay if I had an ultrasound of my abdomen or another appropriate screening test? An ultrasound of the abdomen looking at the pancreas gland is a very non-invasive test that could be done without any harm. So I would suggest anyone with those sorts of symptoms could do that. So that would be one of the main calls to action. Also to make sure that we follow up with people who have a strong family history of pancreas cancer and ensure that their families are adequately screened. There are now recommendations for anyone who's diagnosed with pancreas cancer under the age of 60 to be referred to a cancer genetics counsellor for the possible screening of relatives. So we just need to make sure that those messages are heard loud and clear by our community.
You've touched on a few important points there, Lorraine. When Mum was diagnosed, we had to ask, as Jess asked about her dear mum, what is the pancreas and where is it and what does it do? And David, have you found that in practice, that people are nervous about asking simple questions that might really be able to help?
I think people are getting more empowered than they used to, actually. And I don't see that people are backward about coming forward in a way they were a decade ago. So I think the public is much better informed. It's just, interestingly, the digestive system is something where people just, they do have a bit more embarrassment about it. So talking about your bowels, talking about nausea, talking about feeling full in the belly, they seem to still be slightly no-go areas compared to, look, I felt a lump in my breast, or I've got a mole and I'm worried about it. That's the issue. We have to kind of make people feel comfortable about it. And in particular, our biggest problem is actually that men are so reticent about coming up with any health concern. Women seem to be more open about talking about these things with each other and with their health practitioners, and men are very closed about their health.
Yes, we need to get past the embarrassment and any kind of fear of talking about our digestive systems. Phoebe, what's your call to action to anyone watching this tonight?
I think the point Lorraine made is a very good point, and it's hard for us to advocate because we obviously have a bias. We're clinicians or researchers working in this area. So if you are able to get behind us and you think this is important, contacting your local minister, contacting the Cancer Australia roadmap people, getting in touch with people and telling them the importance of research, of funding clinical trials and funding that whole pipeline is really critical for us to make advances. And it's only with community support that we're going to have a big impact in this space. Thanks.
And I could say that Australia is awesome at pancreas cancer. We are a very close community. We know each other by first names all around the country. We are good at it. All we need is the resources. We've got all the ideas, the skills, and the expertise that are needed, I think.
What a perfect note to finish on. We are awesome. Thank you again for joining us, Professor David Goldstein, Dr. Lorraine Chantrell, and Associate Professor Phoebe Phillips. We thank you for your work. More power to you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.
Our sincere thanks to Tracy, David, Lorraine, and Phoebe for that very informative conversation. I would now like to introduce two very special personal messages. Ali Stunt is the CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Action UK. She is also a 13-year survivor of pancreatic cancer. Ali was fortunate that the cancer was diagnosed early and she was a candidate for surgery. Just like us, Ali has been asked why she continues to work in the advocacy and fundraising space, constantly surrounded by pancreatic cancer. And just like us, Ali is dedicated to ensuring that more people have the same outcome as she did, survival. Following Ali's story, we'll hear from Dr. Marjorie O'Neill MP, New South Wales State Member of Parliament for the electorate of Coogee, who lost her father to pancreatic cancer in March 2019. Marjorie has a doctorate in economics and is a rising star in the Labor Party in New South Wales. She's a strong advocate for raising awareness of pancreatic cancer and has dedicated her very popular podcast series, Coogee Voice, to pancreatic cancer awareness this November. Purple Our World features in the first of these podcasts.
Well, the first symptom I had, which I didn't recognise as being anything to do with pancreatic cancer, was new onset type 2 diabetes. And that was diagnosed a year before my diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And I didn't fit the profile of a type 2 diabetic. But then I started getting pain in my back, and it was pain in my upper mid-back. If you think of where a lady's bra strap sits, just to the right, and that radiated round to the front. I also had pain on eating, not as the food was going down, but as it hit the stomach, and I'd be doubled over after just a few mouthfuls of food. I had change in bowel habit, and I also found that I was losing weight without trying. A lot of my symptoms were thought of as being other diseases such as irritable bowel syndrome, indigestion, and also gallstones. Main risk factors for pancreatic cancer are not very well known, but we do know that age is the most common risk factor. Smoking also can account for around about 25 to 30% of cases, and obesity is becoming more of a risk factor as the population tends to get a little bit larger. Other risk factors are predisposition in terms of genetics, and also it does run in some families.
Hi everyone. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Purple Our World for inviting me to help spread awareness on International Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Day. Some of you might know my father, Brian O'Neill, passed away from pancreatic cancer the day after the New South Wales state election. My father was my mentor, my friend, and the best dad anyone could ever ask for. Like many families, we had no idea about pancreatic cancer or what a devastating or traumatic form of cancer that it was. Brian was diagnosed in November 2018, and passed away less than 4 months later, which is why I'm saying to you, it is so important that you learn the signs, and if you or any of your friends display them, insist on getting tested, because it's about time.
It's about time to know the symptoms. It's about time to listen to your body. It's about time to speak up for pancreatic cancer patients and their families. But in 2020, it's also about the time you would have if the cancer is diagnosed early enough for surgery or better treatment options. It's about the extra week, month, or year you would have with your loved one. It's about the moments you'll create and the memories you'll share. It's about time. There's no such thing as a good cancer. The common cancers, breast, prostate, melanoma, have all received attention and funding for many years. Cancer of the pancreas simply has not. It's about time it did. Let's hope the development of the National Pancreatic Cancer Roadmap, commissioned by Federal Minister of Health, the Honourable Greg Hunt, currently being developed by Cancer Australia, brings some good news. Cancer Australia states, the National Pancreatic Cancer Roadmap will identify key priority areas of action for the next 5 years across the continuum of pancreatic cancer care and pancreatic cancer research to improve outcomes and survival for people with pancreatic cancer. Cancer Australia is seeking submissions by the 30th of November, so there's still time. Visit the Cancer Australia website to have your say. Many people who have beaten the disease have been diagnosed early. The cancer has been found by chance. But it should not be luck that pancreatic cancer is diagnosed early enough for surgery. So here's what we're asking you. Tomorrow, when you wake up, grab something purple. If you've got a gorgeous purple dress or suit, excellent, but it can be something as simple as purple nail polish, a purple tie, or a purple ribbon. Put it on, take a picture, and share that picture on social media. It doesn't matter whether you have 1 follower, 10 followers, or 10,000 followers. Every person counts. And remember to use the hashtag #It'sAboutTime. Start the conversation. I'm wearing purple today to raise awareness of pancreatic cancer. You'd be surprised at how many people in your networks have been touched by pancreatic cancer too. Most people know of someone who has died of this terrible disease. Talk about the statistics, that those diagnosed with pancreatic cancer have an average survival of just 6 months, that only 1 in every 10 people diagnosed in Australia will survive 5 years. Talk about the symptoms, persistent stomach pain, mid-back pain, unexplained weight loss, jaundice, indigestion, changes in stool, and new onset diabetes. And talk about the need to discuss your concerns with your GP. Tomorrow is World Pancreatic Cancer Day, and it's up to all of us to raise awareness for pancreatic cancer. It's about time to collectively raise our voices to change the future for pancreatic cancer patients and their families. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of our good friends and colleagues who have contributed to this webinar and in our mission of improving survival rates for pancreatic cancer patients. Julie Fleshman, Ali Stunt, Marjorie O'Neill, And a very special thank you to our panelists David, Lorraine, and Phoebe, who do so much for the sufferers of pancreatic cancer. And of course, thank you, Tracy, for moderating the scientific session. For those who wish to donate, please consider our charity partners. We look forward to seeing our social media feeds flooded with purple tomorrow. It's about time to stand up for those affected by pancreatic cancer. Once again, our sincere thanks and good night.